I think there's a lot of overlap between the product manager role and the design role. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that PMs do that designers do not. And for many, there's a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of knowledge about data and all kinds of things that design often doesn't have to take into account. But I think, certainly many are transitioning to that role because it does give them more power over the product, over the roadmap.
Welcome to Design Drives, your audio experience about what, how, and why design drives things forward. A podcast hosted by Sebastian Gier, together with forward-thinking design practitioners from around the world.
In this episode, I talk with Dan Saffer during Interaction 20 by IXDA in Milan, where both of us gave a talk. Dan did wear many hats during his career, currently working with AI and machine learning as a senior staff product designer at Twitter in San Francisco, shaping the onboard experience. He's also author of 4 influential design books, including Designing Devices, Designing Gestural Interfaces, Designing of Interaction, and the book Microinteractions. In the description of the episode, you're gonna find the link to the books. Besides being a very influential designer, he was also the VP of Product at Mayfield Robotics, Creative Director at JBone, and Smart Design. We talk about the intersection of design and product management roles, how design influences product strategy, and of course, robotics. Key challenges when designing robotic products from scratch, and where he thinks the space is going. I absolutely enjoyed the conversation and find Dan's perspective super inspiring. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'm here with Dan. Hi Dan, you are senior staff product designer at Twitter, and then in the past did various things from being a VP of product at Mayfield Robotics, creative director at JBone, and then working at Smart Design and Adaptive Path, but then also co-founding your own ventures, for example, with the Kicker Studio. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, the long journey of different experiences in design. And it's been interesting because you saw design from a lot of different lenses, right? From being responsible for the whole product, then working in-house, but also consultancy. So I think that's going to be very interesting.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my whole career, which as you say is long and varied, I've been chasing a lot of new technologies, and sometimes those technologies are coming up, in the agency world because technology companies just were trying to figure out what to do. And then sometimes they've been in-house, where in-house is kind of the best to explore those things. So my role has definitely shifted around from in-house to agency and back again. And it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. Maybe can you talk a little bit about, in your own words, a little bit about your journey and your motivation also being in the creative field, being in the design field?
Sure. I got started because I was working at a book publisher and was interested in the web and found myself kind of transitioning to the web. And from there, after a couple of years of working in various roles, mostly in kind of the producer, project manager kind of roles, I started to really say I really want to drift towards design. That's kind of what I'm feeling, the kind of creative side of making products. And so I went back to school at Carnegie Mellon, and then have been working as a designer ever since. And the combination of, not only design and the books that I write and those kinds of things are all creatively kind of tied up together. Mm-hmm. And so I find it a satisfying career for someone who's interested in things like problem solving and thinking about the future and science fiction. And my dad is a plumber and my mother is a therapist. And sometimes I see my job as the combination of those two things, putting the pipework together.
So I think what's very interesting is, you already mentioned it, the chance to work on some really forward-thinking projects and really contribute there from a design perspective. And since you're also writing books and being an author there, I was wondering, what is the impact and outcome you want to drive with your work moving forward?
So right now I work on Twitter's onboarding team, and the onboarding team's job is to get new users to the right content and other people that they would be interested in. And so one of the technologies that we're using to try to do that are these really interesting, complex, oftentimes inscrutable, at least to me, machine learning and AI type algorithms. And so one of the things that I think that all designers are going to be wrestling with is how do we take these things that are very inhuman by their very nature and make them into things that more human. So I work with these really great engineers and programmers, and like working with them and to tweak the algorithms to make them feel human or seem more human or more interesting or more weird even, I think is something that is a really interesting part of my job right now. And I think it's really going to be part of all of our jobs in the next 10 years, maybe forever, now that these systems are starting to be in place. How do we take these large systems of computational power and start to apply them, but keep the kind of human world that we really want and really need, and keep the world, designed for us and the other living beings in it.
Yeah, I think, the aspect of onboarding of a product or service is a very interesting touch point. I got the chance also in my role to explore this in recent time a little bit because, if you reduce friction, you could really drive change, right? And if you make this a pleasant experience, and you could see so many bad examples of applications out there and some that really strive exactly to that touch point by really making this a pleasant experience, making it playful. And it's also driving very much the experience you have in a product or service, because depending on how many questions you may be asking, what kind of data you request, you're going to shape the experience, especially the experience in the beginning of that product or service. So it's such a crucial touch point, right?
No, absolutely. How you set things up in the beginning and connecting people to the topics or people that would be interesting to them, especially in a product that's frankly as complex as Twitter and has so many different use cases. And if you do it right, you set them up for like an amazing time. And Twitter is just an amazing one of a kind product that, is very difficult to replicate, very difficult, to have any kind of similar experience elsewhere than you can get on Twitter. But getting people into that is a really difficult challenge, because I like to joke that, hey, it's almost like an enterprise tool, but for the whole world, So how do we make it great for people? And all the new things that my other teammates are coming up with eventually drift down to onboarding, because we have to introduce them to people. We have to say like, hey, here's this new thing, that's in your timeline. And now, this is how you deal with that or work with that.
When you say onboarding, do you also, obviously you mean the onboarding of the applications, but then also how about first time use of certain features? Is that also part of?
Exactly. So we're trying to extend our charter so that the tools that we use when onboarding a new user, we're also going to be using for existing users going forward, so that as we introduce new features, we can use the same kinds of tools and kinds of prompts that we do for new users for people who are experienced. And so that's a new thing for us, and something that we're really looking forward to, expanding our mandate.
Yeah. How much do you have the need to work with branding and communication when it comes to onboarding? Because, if you shape the onboard experience, you also want to maybe influence a little bit the tonality when it comes to just the first impression of the whole product and service. So I assume this is a interesting intersection there, right?
Yeah. Well, the very beginning of any any user experience, I think, is kind of the marketing of it, right? I mean, once you get the awareness that something is there,
Yeah.
it sets the tone for what to, it sets expectations really, like, oh, this is what this thing is for. We do work with our brand, our partners in brand, and there's some interesting stuff happening there that I can't divulge right now, but their work is definitely touching ours and vice versa.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting about your experiences is you also, obviously, you have a large design background, but then at Mayfield Robotics, you were basically in charge of the whole product, right? So I think this is also an interesting shift because there are not so many PMs with coming from design. I think there's more and more coming in that direction, but it's not so many examples yet. So I wonder a little bit about your personal experience with this and what it enabled you.
That was a great role in that, and one that you can really probably only really do on a fairly small team where, I wore both hats as kind of the head of product and the head of design. And so that was a great role in that I was able to do both design and product and kind of be the head of both, and it only really works on a small team, but it was great in that I was able to kind of wear both hats and switch them as necessary. So I would say, is this a product problem or is this a design problem or vice versa, and try to solve problems that way. It really gave me a wide latitude for things like the roadmap, like being able to say like, oh, okay, these are the features that we're going to need. How do we start to design them and in what order? And so it was a really great role. I mean, gave me a lot of respect for what the kinds of product management that happens at Twitter is a much more sophisticated one than the one that I was doing. But I was also, I was getting my hands dirty in things like warranties and sales price of sale and, battery life and those kinds of things that were really, really cool, really fascinating, like, oh, quite a steep learning curve for me, but it was really great to have that experience.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there should be more PMs with a design background?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap between the product manager role and the design role. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that PMs do that designers do not. And for many, there's a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of knowledge about data and all kinds of things that design often doesn't have to take into account. But certainly many are transitioning to that role because it does give them more power over the product, over the roadmap. We have a great PM at Twitter, Eleanor Harding, who was a designer and transitioned into being a PM. And now she runs the TweetDeck product that we have. And yeah, I think it's a great role if you can move into it.
What were some of your other learnings working on robotics and AI at Mayfield Robotics?
One of the things that I learned is just, how challenging robots are. I mean, it's someone that we were talking to about manufacturing was like, hey, robots are pretty much the hardest thing you can build. And so understanding, just all the complexities that go into it and things that you don't really even think of, like, what height of a door jam can the robot go over? What sounds, how loud is the robot? Like, we would rent Airbnbs and run the robot around and test with with sound meters to see like how loud is this thing and be like, okay, it's got to be quieter. You got to be, so there's a lot of nuance like that. A lot of when you have something that moves around a 3D space, it's just a very different kind of experience and even something that you hold in your hand or something that sits on a shelf or something like that. It's just a very challenging but fascinating and really fun. And just when you see these things moving around moving around in space and just kind of rolling around. And because the Currys were so cute, it was like, especially when you had a couple of them running around, it was really fun. And then but yeah, I mean, it's not a nascent space in that there's tons of robots doing stuff right now. It's just but it's a space that's definitely growing, and the technology and navigation and all that kind of stuff is just things that are exponentially getting better. And so I think that it's a field that's right now kind of, at least in the consumer space, is kind of fallow, but I think in the next 5 to 10 years it'll pick up again and be really exciting.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you point out about the complexity. It's not just the hardware complexity, right? The complexity about the manufacturing, everything, but then also about the interaction, right? The scenarios are unlimited, right? And it's like you have to sort of like pick kind of what are scenarios you focus on, what kind of interactions you want to solve. And then still, like if you narrow it down and go for a certain niche, the way these interactions could play out, and I can imagine it's like so complex, right? And then also, again, onboarding, right? Like teaching the user, like how is that interaction working, right? Because people are not used to it. There's no legacy of this.
I mean, talk about onboarding. I mean, we had a lot of discussions around like how do you introduce the robot to your house, and how do you introduce it to the people living in the house, and even down to the unboxing. One of the options was kind of the robot lying down, but we didn't want that because it was like, oh, it looks like the robot's in like a coffin or something like that. So when we had packaging, we made it so that the robot is actually standing up in the package, and you kind of lift it out of the package.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, in an ideal situation, like you would, unbox it and the robot would roll out. But that is a very challenging thing to make sure that it has enough power to do that, and all kinds of things. But yeah, you really have to think about those kinds of things. And yeah, the whole service that wraps around a robot, things like, when you buy it and how you turn the service on, and then how are you controlling it? Is it voice? Is it touch? Is it gesture? Is it all of those things? Usually that stuff is really fascinating, but all of it adds complexity. And then you have this kind of emotional layer that lives on top of it too. Like, does the robot, respond when it gets to stairs and is scared of falling down them, So we had when it got to stairs, it would kind of like look around and like, and like back up. And so stuff like that, which is the stuff that you're really buying the robot for, is that kind of personality, that kind of thing is just another kind of layer, especially if it can't respond exactly at the moment. Like it's, because sometimes these robots have to, think for a few seconds. And that's like, how do you indicate even that, like, oh, hold on, I'm thinking about this. Like, stuff like that is really, you have to always be signaling intentionality with robots. Like, this is, I'm intentionally doing this. I'm not just sitting here staring into space kind of thing.
Yeah. I think there's, so interesting, there was a talk yesterday about also AI and how do you deal with, if you're unable to deliver or you're not sure if the answer is correct, right? And want to maybe phrase it differently, right? And I think the aspect of humor, I think, is important. And I could also see that, when I look at the robot, that the way also the industry design, I guess there was some thinking also around like, how do the robot has to appear? Maybe it can't deal with certain situation, and maybe the appearance could help people also, deal with this and say, well, we don't mind, and we still love the robot.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of discussion around like what happens when the robot just doesn't understand the command, it's really trying to listen and trying to understand, like a voice command, for instance. And, when does it give up and just like shake its head and like put its head down and be like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. I don't know what you're asking me. We also had ideas around like, if you asked it things that, because it didn't speak human language, it spoke kind of a robotic kind of beeps and whistles. But if you asked it questions that it couldn't answer or do, that it would reply in robot language, it kind of, and so like it would try to answer and try to be helpful. You just couldn't understand what they answer, because if you're like, oh, hey, Curry, what's the weather today? It can't really say like, oh, it's rainy, but it would be like, beep, 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 like,
Yeah.
And then be like, oh, right, I can't ask you those kinds of questions. I mean, it was hopefully a process of education, like, hey, I can't do oh, right, there's a limit to what you know and can tell me.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when I think you guys have worked on it, there was not so many infrastructure you could build on, right? I think, these days with robotics, I think you were pointing out, I think it will pick up later again. And the point might be where there's more infrastructure for startups and, companies to strive on. Because if you look at also how mobile experiences, sort of the evolution of mobile experiences, nowadays there's so much infrastructure, right? To create applications, to create solutions. And this is not really there with the complexity of robots yet, right? There's no frameworks you could easily build on. You basically have to pull it all together yourself. And I think this is so challenging with robotic startups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I keep, I think of 1978 or mobile phones were in 1996 or something like that, where they're in use. They're in a lot of specific areas. They're in a lot of industrial use. But right, there's not a lot of frameworks. There's, it's hard to build apps on top of them. There's, the parts are, I mean, you can buy like, oh, here's a LiDAR thing off the shelf, but it's not easy. You really have to like know what you're doing, and putting it all together into something that works is something, is a challenge. Like they're all bespoke basically. And yeah, we're just not there yet. But I mean, we're also seeing a lot of really interesting things around, machine learning, where we're starting able to like not having to do as much like programming, but do more, training. Like, oh, this is how you pour a cup of tea. Watch me do it 4 times, and then then the robot can do it. So we're starting to see a lot of stuff like that. That's like, oh wow, this is a game changer.
Machine learning frameworks, basically, right?
Basically, yeah.
You could build on.
Right.
It's very much an engineering problem in a way, or like a technical restrictions, right? And that also limit what you could do from a design side and the interaction side. But maybe this is sort of the core, right?
Yeah, I mean, like everything, you've got a design platform. You're designing on top of, engineering platforms, and the constraints of those are design become design constraints. Like, oh, you just can't do that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, how do you getting a robot that can walk upstairs. Well, you can buy that right now. It's just really expensive or, really clunky. So there's, stuff like that. That's just like, okay, I guess we're going to go with the wheels for now. And then, and then the wheels have their own issues. Like what if they, do they get tangled? Can you replace them? What if they, your dog has an accident in the house and the robot runs over it? Like, how do you clean the wheels? There's all kinds of, everything has its own trade-offs, I guess. And yeah, it's a maturing field.
Mm-hmm. I think one maybe quite robust robotic field is maybe the topic around. Yeah, it's like the topic about vacuum cleaners, right? I mean, they are really
the vacuum cleaner.
Vacuum cleaner really, it's a field of robotics in a way where it really, found use for a lot of people already, and it's maybe some of the first signs of where this could go. And I think it's interesting. There are a lot of Chinese startups also doing really great stuff there. And if you look at the iterations of products, some of the vacuum cleaners, I noticed that every evolution they do, they get so much better also with the data they gather. So, if you look at what Google can do these days, because they have all these data and are in the game early and build up these data assets, I think there could be something similar, I think, on a robotic side. Because you learn with every product, and the more products you deliver, the better your data set gets. So,
right. Absolutely. The iRobot stuff is great because, they're starting to, before they had no mechanism to collect all that data. And now that all the Roombas are wired, and so they're able to now share data. And now, all the Roombas are getting better, right? Because of shared data. And yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah. People have asked me like, and have asked me things like, do you think that there's going to be like one robot that will like do everything in your house? Like, it's going to mow the lawn. It's going to come in and mop your floor. It's going to vacuum. It's going to clean and I find that a very improbable. I think that yes, some places will have, that kind of Android-like manservant, but I feel like the robots for specific tasks, like Roombas or one's for bathroom, one's for, I think those are probably the way that things are going. Just, hey, my outside snowblower robot doesn't need to come in and clean my floors.
Exactly.
So I think that, things rather than a single robot that will do it all.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of times people get wrong, right? I think if you look at it, it's sort of an evolution of home appliances, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, robotics slowly get the introduction into home appliances, and it's, you could almost say it's an evolution of that, right? So you had vacuum cleaners before, but now they're robotic, right? They will have robotic aspects introduced. So I think it's super interesting how this transition goes slowly but steady. And yeah, maybe, looking at the broader spectrum of interaction design, since we're here at Interaction 20 in Milan. Where do you see interaction design going, and maybe some of the challenges moving forward and some of the important topics that will arise?
Yeah, I mean, I think, since it is, at least in the US, it's an election year. And so I think we're going to see, I think right now we're seeing just a lot of discussion around security and misinformation and privacy and and data collection and how we use that, and is there legislation around that? I mean, we've already seen GDPR here in Europe, and that's spreading to the US and elsewhere. And so what are those kinds of protections that are coming that we're going to have to not only, I think, design around, but it would be great if we were part of those conversations around policy. Like, what are we keeping and how? Because there are things that simply are better because we know more about you. And we may have to say like, some of those things are kept encrypted on your object versus, in the cloud. And making those kinds of arguments and decisions, I hope that designers are involved in. And then there's, so there's all kind of the like policy, complexity, wicked problem side of things that I think we're involved in. I guess I'll call that kind of an umbrella of like governance. And then there's, there's interesting things like, I think AR is another big area that is going to be big and really interesting. Certainly the rise of more intelligent appliances, as we were saying, and voice continues to get more and more sophisticated. Voice UIs, all the translation stuff is becoming amazing right now, with the ability to just switch between, from, English to Spanish really easily. So I think there's a bunch of stuff coming in that realm. And then, those are the big ones. And then, obviously robotics, which we've talked a lot about, I think is another burgeoning field that is just over the horizon for us. But there's so much it feels like there's like an overwhelming amount of problems to tackle and stuff to do. And I don't see us being replaced by robots next year. Thankfully.
Not yet. One day. Yeah. Okay. I think we need to wrap it up because of time. But thank you so much for sharing all these insights. It's been amazing.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Glad to be here. Hope it was interesting.
For sure.
That was the episode. If you want to give us feedback on the podcast, have something to contribute to the next episode, or just want to get in touch, Feel free to connect with us either on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram messages, or simply via the designdrives.org website. We love to hear from you.